In this lesson, we're going to start off by adding a couple of extra features to the sample application that we started in the last lesson. And we're going to run right into some serious limitations in our current knowledge of Ruby. So the examples we'll choose will provide a motivation for taking a little detour and getting a taste of some Rails-flavored Ruby. Let's start off with a navigation to the sample app directory. Let's open it up. So let me give you a reminder of where we left off. We have an application directory here with a controller called Pages Controller that defines some actions with a title that changes on a per page basis. So let's take a look at one of the views. We have app, views, pages, and then say home.html.erb. And notice that there's no title in here. That's because the title got refactored into a layout file called app views layouts application.html.erb, which is the universal name for the default Rails template. So if you have a file with this name, Rails will automatically use it as the layout for the site. And remember, this magical line here yields the contents of this view into this template, and so it goes inside the body tag. So one of the things you might notice here is that we have this this Ruby on Rails tutorial sample app, and then this pipe character, this vertical bar, and then a title. Now let's take a look and see what happens if we were, for some reason, to omit this @title variable, which might very well happen, and we might want to do that on some pages. Now if we open up a browser window, see what this does for us. Let's take a look at localhost 3000/pages/home. Remember, we actually haven't started the server yet, so let's start that up. And actually, I like to do this. This is just a sanity check as a first step after starting a server. I like to get my test suite running. So let's do this. Rails S for server, and then for my system, I'm going to start Spork. And then it's amazing how often I'll leave a project that was in a state of green only to discover that somehow it's red. I don't know how that happens, but it does. So I like to be, well, some might say paranoid. I prefer the word cautious or prudent. Let's run the test suite just to make sure, in fact, we're green. And look at that, we're actually not green. Oh, see, the reason we're not green is because I made that change. So let's go take a look. It's good to get green. All right, so we're going to be getting red in a moment here, but it's okay. Now we know why we're getting red. We're getting red because we're actually making a change that will introduce some redness into our lives. All right, so let's do this. This is going to be red. That's okay. That's what we want right now. Because I want to show you what happens if you visit Pages Home. Now look at this title. It says Ruby on Rails tutorial sample app vertical bar. And the reason for that is because of this template, this layout file that we have. It doesn't handle the case of not having an @title variable defined. But this is the kind of thing that you often want on a site. You want some sort of default global title that then you can then specialize to a particular case. So the way I would handle this, or at least one possible way, is to define what's called a helper. So let's take a look at the auspiciously named helpers folder here under app helpers, and we see that there are two helper files. There's an application helper and a pages helper. Now it turns out that all helpers defined in any of these files are available all the time in every view. So it actually doesn't really matter which one we define our helper in, but it's nice to partition these guys conceptually, these helpers. And in this case, I'm going to be making a title helper. And you might think, well, this should be in the pages helper, because after all, that's all we've got in this application. But in this case, the title helper really will potentially work site-wide. So let's do application helper. This is for helpers that work in the entire application. And now I'm just going to put in some code. One of the motivations for this is to show that in order to do this relatively simple thing, we need a whole bunch more Ruby than we currently know. So let's get going with this. But one way to handle this situation is to create a helper like this. So So I'm not explaining this by design because the whole point is that this should look more or less mysterious, although you might be able to read it. Ruby is fairly readable as programming languages go. But what I've done here is defined a title helper that handles the base case. So let's take a look at the pages controller. Actually, we need to take a look at the layout. And so I'm going to replace this construction with some embedded Ruby that just has the title helper. Instead of @title, I just have title, which is the name of this helper. And now if you look at the title, it says Ruby on Rails tutorial sample app, and it doesn't have that hanging vertical bar character. So that's pretty nice. But this one example introduces all kinds of new stuff. So we haven't seen this before. We haven't seen the idea of a module. I've mentioned a couple times this idea of a comment character, but this is the first time we've used it in a function and defined in a module, certainly. This is the first time we've defined a general Ruby function that wasn't an action. This is the first time in the context of a method or a function, which as we'll see are the same thing in Ruby, that we've defined a local variable. Notice there's no @ in front of base title here. This is our first control flow so far, if @title.nil question mark. This is the first time we've seen anything like this. This is a method call with a question mark, known as a Boolean method. And we also have this notation, which is new. So there's a lot of Ruby going on in just this little snippet. This is the kind of little helper that an experienced Rails developer might knock off in 30 seconds, but it is just rich with examples of how Ruby works and examples of how we don't really understand Ruby all that well right now. But I actually do want to have an @title here. Actually, I can just Command Z this thing, undo, and this will run the test suite. As it turns out in this application, I think every page does in fact have an @title defined, but it's really nice to know that if we happen to forget, that the title of the resulting page will still be something sensible. So I'm going to commit this. Well, let's just look at get status. I'm going to say get commit all with the message added a title helper. So far in the last lesson and in this lesson, I've been working on the master branch, and in future lessons I'll probably make separate branches, just topic branches, as we'll see, for making changes. But for now, these are small changes. I'm just going to go ahead and work on the master branch. All right, so there's a second change I want to introduce, which is to introduce a style sheet for the website. This will have good effects in the longer run. Right now it won't make that much of a difference actually, but it's nice to have some sort of style assigned to our application. You can see it's pretty plain right now. And we're not going to change that a whole lot, but the typography at least will improve a little bit. In order to get us started with style sheets, I'm going to use a style sheet framework called Blueprint that I particularly like. And we can install it either as a zip file or as a tarball, a TGZ file. Let's go ahead and do a zip file this time. And I trust that you know how to unzip a zip file. Let's take a look at this. And you can see that there's a new directory here. And one of the directories inside that is a directory called Blueprint. And that's the directory we want. That's where the style sheets live. If you look at it, there are style sheet files in here. So we need to copy that to our sample application directory. You may recall from the last lesson that the index.html file, which came with Rails, and the file hello.html that we created both went in the public directory. That's the general directory for publicly accessible content. And in this case, a style sheet certainly qualifies. A browser has to be able to download the style sheet. So let's copy it there. And it's a recursive copy since it's a directory. /downloads. And then this is what is this? There we go. And Blueprint. Now, you have to be careful there. I did a tab completion. And if I were to copy this, it would actually copy the stuff inside the Blueprint directory. So I'm going to get rid of that trailing slash. You see it? And this way it'll actually copy the directory, which is what I want. It doesn't matter too much, but this is a little cleaner. And now we're going to put it in the public directory, but it doesn't just go in public, it goes in public style sheets. There's a dedicated directory just for style sheets. And there we go. Let's just list it just to be sure. And there it is.